I thank you that you, in all of your infinite wisdom and in all of your infinite glory and in all of your greatness, set that aside to take on our sin. God, I thank you for the cross. I thank you that you bought us out of our own predicament. And I thank you that you have satisfied the wrath of God with your death. God, help us to take that seriously and help it to change the way in which we live our lives. Help us to live our lives as people who have been bought with a very high price and know it. Help us to live as people who appreciate that and out of that live in obedience. God, help us not to be like others who have ran for a little while and then fallen away, but help us to be consistent with you. And God, help us to look like you want us to look. And in your name we pray. Amen. So in looking at this text, the context is pretty important. As with all of the rest of the passages that we've ever looked at and ever will look at, realize that the Bible is not a bunch of just stories that are loosely scattered together, especially in the Gospels. They are arranged on purpose. And that's why if you read it in the flow in Matthew's Gospel, it'll look a little different than it does in John's Gospel or Luke or Mark's. And the reason is that whereas we think of writing a history, and we think of writing that they're writing history, and therefore, you've got to get it in the right sequence and in the right order. Well, one, Jews don't think of history in that exact term. They do think of it as kind of follow this line of thought and then follow this line of thought. And that's valid, but also they're not just writing history. While, I affirm that it is historically true, and I wouldn't doubt any of the historicity, that's not what I'm about to say, but this is a gospel, not a history, though it is true when it speaks of matters of history. Its goal is to help you understand this is who God is, this is what God did for you, and this is how that affects you, how you need to change in response to these two facts. So the arrangement is often meant to direct our thoughts and to help us to see something a little more clearly. What comes right before this, you will remember, is the disciples have just watched Jesus bless little children. And then here comes the rich young ruler who, they're like, okay, you bless the children who have no standing, who have no... Why are they important? But yet you rebuke the guy who we thought we're in. God, are we okay? And the disciples asked this question of Jesus. They asked, are we okay? Peter is kind of the forerunner, or not the forerunner, but the forefront guy. He's the mouthpiece of the disciples oftentimes. I guess his shoulders were broad enough to take it. But in the process, he brings up to Jesus, hey, are we okay? Because I want to make sure that if he's not in and we don't think we're up to his standard, are we okay? And Jesus reassures him, you have left everything. And if you follow me, there is not a person who I won't take note of that. I know what you've done, and I will give you the proper reward. Well, the disciples like the talk of the reward. And he mentions to them that this reward will be when you come into the kingdom, the 12 of you will sit on 12 thrones, which, as we have pointed out, needs to be on the sticky side of our brain, that Judas is one of those 12. Now, I don't mean to say we'll thus ignore the fact that he proves that he's not really a disciple later on, but I bring that up so that it is an indication to me that that is not a literal, when you get to heaven, you'll walk up, there'll be Jesus, and then 6 on each side of him because we like order and symmetry, and they'll be to the disciples, or any of that. What is being said is discipleship has a reward. You will make it in. You will be what you want. You'll be with me, is the point of what Jesus is getting at. He then tells a story or a parable about how he gives by grace, not by merit, but the guys who work all day in the vineyard make the same wage as the person who works an hour or two in the vineyard. And that story is all about how merit in the kingdom is handed out by grace. Your standing, your position, your reward, if you will, your wage, is grace. It comes from grace. So on one hand, you can take that as an excuse to be lazy, I guess. And you can kind of throw out and say, well, if I'm going to get in and I'm going to get the same as, somebody who spends all day evangelizing and somebody who spends all day trying to be what they should be, and I can just be a schmo, and I'll get the same reward. Okay, but why? At that point, I question your real understanding of who God is. I mean, this is the Savior who, in the verses we're now looking at, comes up and says, okay, guys, I'm going to go to the cross as the Messiah, as God incarnate, and I'm going to go die on your behalf because I'm going to ransom you out. I'm going to go die in your place so that way the wrath of God is appeased. And that's the one that we go, well, I'll just slack at. Yeah, like at that point, I have to question your understanding of Christianity. It's one of those things, and since she's not exactly in here, I could go, my wife loves me, I'm going to go, I'll be on the couch, I'm going to take a nap, I'm going to go, do whatever. She makes me tea, I'm good, I'm just going to go sit over here and I'll be dozing. Or I can be like, my wife loves me. And I know that my wife loves me because I hear what my children say. Which is just one of those really brilliant things of, every now and then Judah will pop out with something, I'll be like, you heard that from your mother, because I know you didn't figure that out. Clearly my wife is building, she's demonstrating love by, A, making me sweet tea, which is just great, but also in how she is, respecting me in front of my son, especially, which is really great for me. But in the process of that, I could go, okay, or it can have the effect that it has. I'm going to live up now to set expectation. Because my wife has painted in my son's eye that I am, like 50 feet tall and bulletproof and I wear a big S. I'm going to figure out how to fly before long. Okay, this is, and that's the same reaction that I think we should have when we look and go, okay, we can either get the same reward by working or by not working, but he loves me enough to die for me. Laziness doesn't seem like it's really an option anymore. And it baffles me when people have that attitude, when they become apathetic in Christianity. It seems to me that should be a good litmus test that you should reevaluate. That you should double check and ask that question that Peter asked of, God, are we okay? Maybe I've missed something here. Are we good? But also then, Jesus pulls his disciples to the side, and they're within view, in all likelihood, of Jerusalem. They're probably about 30 miles-ish, 20 to 30 miles from Jerusalem. And since Jerusalem sits on a hill, you're probably able to see, not in great detail, but they're probably looking at, there's Jerusalem. And Jesus knows, once I go in, I'm not coming back out. This is the end point for me. Our journey's done. So let me build into you perhaps one last time so that you all hear it while we're all together. Here's what you need to know. I'm going to go die. And he explains how he's going to go die. So that way when Judas hands him over, and it really is delivered is kind of the term for betrayed. It's what you would use of a traitor, giving over classified information, if you will. And he's building them up. He's explaining to them, be expecting of this because this is coming. So that way when it happens, they don't go, oh, we had no idea. Yes, I know. When it happens, they go, oh, we had no idea. But oftentimes God tells us it's going to be hard. And then we go, oh, I had no idea Christianity was going to be so hard. Read the text. And I don't say that lightly, but whoever is selling the bill of goods that come to Jesus so your life will be easy, clearly has never read the book. Christianity is going to be hard. God tells us that on the front end so that we're not surprised at it on the back end, even though we always are. So with that in tow, that brings us then to verse 20. And this likely is right on the heels of it. There's an absurdity to this request. And it's sandwiched, just for the record, with on the front end, I'm going to go die for you. And then on the back end of the story is the story of Bartimaeus, the blind man, calling out in the street. A beggar saying, God, that's the way in which this is sandwiched. So it's heightened by being bookend this way by Matthew. Matthew has intentionally placed these two episodes, and they're probably likely chronologically close, but by putting this in the middle, it only heightens the absurdity of their request and the absurdity of how much they've missed the servitude of the kingdom. But with that in mind, Mom brings the two sons. So as I said a couple of Mother's Days ago, at least she's bringing them to Jesus, though incorrectly. I also understand that this is likely not fully her idea. And I bring that because I think that she was probably listening to her sons recount just a few weeks or so earlier about the whole, Jesus says we're going to rule with him when we get to his kingdom, that we're going to sit on thrones. And this, and they're probably excited about it. She starts thinking, well, I wonder what that order, like she's probably already painted in her head that, there's Jesus in the middle and 6 on this side and 6 on this side. It would be really good. Because she misses it and they miss it. And the way the rest of this text plays out, I think this is probably their idea. And I think they put their mom kind of up to it. Nothing like setting your mother up for failure. Because they don't quite fully understand what this kingdom is. So they convince their mom, I think. This is the way in which I read the text, and I'll show you in a minute. And it is also likely, I can't say this with absolute assurity, but it is probable, in about an 80-20 split, just in case that matters to you, that this is Jesus' aunt. That this is Mary's sister, and that James and John would be his cousins. So there's a little bit of leveraging of family here. And while Jesus is the rabbi and James and John are the subordinates, your aunt still trumps it in their line of thought. So maybe we'll leverage that. Here is Aunt Salome, and she'll get it, and Jesus will be like, well, I should capitulate to my elders, which when you're from eternity, you don't really have elders, but they miss that point. So that's why I think she is the leveraging agent here, why she is bringing their request. And they kneel down. Some of the other Gospels leave her out entirely. And I think Matthew is intentionally leaving her in to show that you can try what you want to try, and you can leverage with whatever you want to leverage, but God is the authority. And at the end of the day, they come down and they make a request. And he asks them, what do you want? What do you wish? What's this about? And so she then says, command, which is not just simply, would you mind to put out a memo? I mean, like, this is you make kind of the royal decree. So that way it's irrevocable. So that way nobody can argue about it later. It's kind of like those of you who have wills, that's that kind of a command. That way nobody can argue with it later. This is how I want it done. So she, when they come into your kingdom, I want my 2 sons to sit on, one on your right, one on your left. I want them to be the chief important people. Make them your second and third in command, but really just make them second in command, and we'll just call it a tie. And that's what she's asking. You make my 2 sons your 2 lieutenants. You make them the 2 next important people in the kingdom. I get it. Now that I'm a parent, I want what's best for my kids. I want my kids to, not be the low end of the spectrum. I'd like for my kids to be important because they're important to me. And it seems like it works that way. But there's an absurdity about this question, especially where it sits. It's not just here that Jesus has been talking about serve each other. Give up your rights so that you can take on the privilege. He has made it very clear for all of his ministry, I'm going to go die on your behalf. You should be like me. None of that sounds like, authority issues. He has authority. He yields his authority, but it's not about the way in which we would say it. It's not about him. Most of everything that he is doing has better benefits on our end. Now, I understand that our salvation glorifies him. Because when the world looks and says, that person got right with God, that God must be amazing. I mean, that's the way in which this works. When our friends see our salvation and they go, I knew you before that. Whoa. There's a certain bit of reputation that goes to God on that. There's a certain bit of glory that God gets because he could save even us. That's what he's gaining out of that. I often make the joke, he got us. And that's true. But he got us because he loved us and because he did what he did. So when she asks this, there's an absurdity of, we really want to be important. Just command it. Make it so, number one. It's kind of how she says it. That's probably going to be an awkward reference that I'll regret later. Or maybe I won't. It's not like you're going to revote. Because I've given you way too many better reasons to do it than that. But in the process, Jesus then focuses his attention not to her, but he goes directly to the two brothers. Which is part of why I say that they're likely the culprits and the instigators. You're like, hey mom, why don't you go tell Jesus? He'll listen to you better. They probably watched Peter enough to know that maybe we don't want to get on his bad side. But in the process, Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. And she really doesn't. Neither do they. Their thoughts about this is, make us important. Make us so that we sit and everybody goes, oh, there's that James and John guy. Oh, man. And it's a totally, it's not just simply, you don't get it. It's, you really don't get it. Your concept of kingdom, my concept of kingdom. And the two aren't touching. Except for, I'm in control. Like, that's the only part, they get the king part right, but none of the rest of the kingdom look. So when he rebukes them, it's not just simply a, you don't know who's sitting there already. It's a, no, you really don't have the foggiest notion of what my kingdom looks like. It's a much harsher rebuke than often we think about it as. But to press it, he then asks, are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? He's just got done saying, I'm going to go die. I'm going to go be betrayed. And it's going to, I'm going to get scourged, mocked, and crucified. And then I'm going to resurrect. Is that what you're asking for here? That's his question. They've just heard what that looks like. And they're like, yep, we're good. But we can do it. And I don't know if they've already forgotten that conversation, or if they're just like, he'll get to Jerusalem and he'll change his mind. He'll decide that this whole crucifixion thing really isn't necessary. Because that's the great temptation. All three of the temptations in the wilderness are built around that premise. Have your kingdom, don't have your cross. Peter, later on, right after they've been, he's like, you can have your kingdom, just not with this cross thing, Jesus. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, tying him back there. James and John here, I think, have the same kind of, he'll get there and then realize he can have his kingdom without the cross. We'll quit talking about it. And we'll just erase that, these little sound bites happened and we'll be okay. So that's what he's saying. Are you willing to come die? Do you think you can come be persecuted and die just like I am? Yeah, we're able. Okay, and we're not going to bother to turn a couple of pages where they run like little girls. I'm just telling you, they run like little girls in a couple of pages. But, you know, they honestly, I think, do think, oh yeah, we're with you. I don't think that it's empty words when Peter later on even says, even if everybody else abandons you. I think they really think that they're there, which is a good sobering lesson for us. And it's one of the things that I really want us to think about. I think we think we're more spiritual, or because that word is often hijacked, I think we think we're further down the road than we often are. And that's why we go through hardships. That's why, at least in part, why we go through trials. So that way we'll realize, oh, I thought I was at mile marker 5. I'm really at mile marker 2. But at least now I know, and God, I'm ready to get to mile marker 5. So allow me to readjust my mentality. Allow me to readjust my heart. Nothing will help you figure out just how much you trust in God like trouble. You know, it's a very sobering moment when you realize, I thought I was a lot stronger than I actually am. You know, and there's a certain bit of health in that to figure out, oh, this is, okay, well, then I want to be over here, though. You know, and then we begin to re-get that momentum that we needed. So I don't think they're lying. I don't think they're just like intentionally, well, I'm going to run away the first chance I get. But no, we're with you. This will advance my career a little bit. So he says to them, and this is just really encouraging, right? My cup you shall drink. So he looks at them and says, okay, deal. We're going to lock it in. Don't make a rash vow, because God expects you to keep it. And sometimes those rash vows are awkward. Just ask Jephthah in the book of Judges. That was brought to me a little while ago. But in the process, you know, they make this, yeah, we're good, we're there. Okay. James is the first martyr of the church. He gets his head lobbed off. And then Herod goes, oh, that made the people happy. I think we'll do that some more. Wait, is Stephen, I think anyways, Stephen or James, one of the two, is the first, because now I think I might have reversed their order. But in any case, he is the first of the 12 to be martyred. Now we understand that his brother John ends up dying of old age, but at the same time, look through his life. If the history we have recorded is correct, I mean, he's boiled in oil and happens to kind of squeak by that. You know, he sounds a lot like Paul by the end of his life. Yeah, they've tried to kill me multiple times. You know, after I was boiled in oil, I went and lived on this island of hard labor for a while. You know, just that. It was a cushy life when he dies of old age. Said, no, whatever. You know, so in the same token, while he may not necessarily be martyred, it's not because they didn't try. He just happens to be old, and I forget exactly what he dies of, if that's even known. But in the process, you know, it's a hard life. All of the disciples, minus Judas, after the crucifixion, are going to live in persecution. They're not going to ever get to retire to the nice condo that overlooks the lake, you know, where the birds chirp and the smell of lavender is just always present. I've decided I like the smell of lavender, sorry. But in the process, you know, this is what we often think of with the disciples, is that they then got to go sit in the ivory towers and desk jobs and life was cushy. That is as far from reality as you can get. So Jesus is affirming, you want to drink my cup? Good, because you're gonna. It's going to be a hard road for you because nobody likes Christians. And guess what? They still don't like us. If you live your Christianity like you should, you're going to get disliked. If you live out the principles of the gospel in your everyday life consistently and correctly, it's going to be a hard road for you. People are going to not like you simply because of it. And they're going to persecute you. Perhaps not in the same way. You're probably not in danger of having your head lopped off. Maybe you would be. I don't want to rule that out, because who knows where you may go or what may come here. But the point is that persecution's coming. They persecuted the master, they'll persecute the slave. They hated him, they'll hate you. And if they don't hate you, you should wonder how closely you look to your master. But in the process, he then goes on, but to sit on my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for whom it has been prepared by my Father. And if your curiosity is going, I wonder who it's prepared for, I don't know. I've tried to figure that out for a long while now. I'm not entirely sure. I have some guesses, but they're weak guesses, so I'm not bringing them up. I'm not even sure if we went out for tacos or coffee that I would bring it up. But in the process, what I do want to point out about this particular verse is that what Jesus is saying is, I have allowed the Father to be the authority. Now there is a heresy that we can slip into if we're not careful, where the Father is, then the Son is, and then the Holy Spirit is. But at the same time, there is a correct view of that, which this verse is reminding us, that there is the Father, then the Son, while equal in every way, has made himself subservient, especially while he is walking the earth, in order that the Father's will is what he's carrying out. There is a intentionality of, let me demonstrate to you what it looks like to follow the Father. And the only way in which I can do that is if I go ahead and place myself in this position. So it's not by nature that he is a rung down, but it is by his, this is how it needs to be. So what that is for us is to go, well, if Jesus recognizes that he is not going to tell the Father what to do, then we need to knock that off ourselves. Which this passage really illustrates the whole, hey, Jesus, we're going to tell you that we're going to sit on you. And he goes, nope, not going to happen. But in the process, we don't know who it is prepared for. And that's not the point. In hearing this, the 10 became indignant with the two brothers. And I think that a lot of that indignation is more because they didn't think about it first. And I'm not the first person to bring that point up, but I think at this point, the rest of them go, wait a minute, we want to be first. How dare you jump the gun? I'm Peter, I get to jump the gun, not you. I don't know. But, you know, there's this certain bit of jealousy is really the word's undercurrent. You know, they become, oh, we can't believe that you're going to, no. You know, it's not that, what do you mean in this kingdom? This kingdom is about suffering, not about rights and privilege. You know, that's not their indignation is, oh, you're going to get a leg up. Their jealousy is what is driving them. Their need to be in charge and to be applauded is what is driving this indignation. So at this point, Jesus then calls them over. And I like that he is, now while he's about to rebuke them, like there's a certain bit of, okay, I've rebuked you a lot in public, and that does happen, but in this particular case, he pulls them to himself, which is, in one hand, a way of saying he's rebuking them in private. But in another sense, it's also he is pulling them to himself to illustrate the rebuke. And as God pulls us to himself, you know, if I'm going to be corrected, I'd rather be corrected by somebody pulling me to themselves than, okay, just go over there because you're an idiot. I mean, you know, like, on one hand, you can see that Jesus is going, Jerusalem's right there, guys. We just talked about this, you bunch of morons. But instead, he's pulling them to himself. There's a certain tenderness in this. You know, it's a rebuke, and don't miss that. Don't soften it to the point of, oh, he's a hippie. You know, it's not that Jesus is a hippie, but he is pulling them to himself, and there is a tenderness in that. It's going to be a rebuke. I mean, you know, they've opened the can of worms. So this is Jesus' rebuke. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority. You know that lost people are bears when they're in charge. If any of you have ever worked for a raging heathen, you know that this is true. You know that it's true that when you walk into the office and some guy is overinflated with his own importance, that he is a jerk to work for. You know, you walk in the and you're just like, oh, I hope you get promoted to a different office. I'm going to pray for your promotion so you'll go away. You know, I've been there. Okay, you know, and it's just like, I really hope you get to leave soon. You're looking. I'm going to pray you get that other job because I believe. You know, like we have those moments where we're just like, I'm working for a jerk because they're overinflated with their own ego, and to prove to you that they're important, they're going to treat you as though you're unimportant. I mean, it doesn't take long for us, you know, and we run into these all the time. And we run it, you know, just wherever you go, there's somebody who's like, well, that's somebody else's job because picking up trash, I'm not going to pick up trash, I'm in a suit. People in suits don't pick up trash. And Jesus says that's what lost people do. Lost people and Gentiles lord it over you that they're in charge. They want you to understand how much better they are than you. If that's the kind of leader you are, by the way, you should take note. Jesus isn't applauding you at this moment. You know, and it's one of those things that as somebody who, at least in some form or fashion, has authority, you know, like I can't help but think, oh, okay, let's evaluate this. You know, these are passages that are meant to grab us in the gut and make us go, okay, God, I want to make sure we're square, right? You know, like this is the point. It is now that we should take inventory, not down the road when trouble happens and for us to go, oh, wait, am I the right kind of leader? You know, now is that time. Today is the day. But Jesus then says, it's not this way among you. When he says it's not this way among you, what he means is it's not supposed to be this way among you. The rules are different for you. Because clearly it is that way among them. That's the problem. This is what he's correcting. The way in which the ground rules work for you is supposed to be different. You're supposed to be, whoever wants to be great must be your servant. So if I want to be great in the kingdom, then I've got to serve. Now understand that we have this undercurrent of people who have sort of caught on to this. And they are monkeying with the definition of being a servant. You know, there are those people who do something and they make sure that you know they've done it. Because they're going to be great by being quiet about their, you know, and they're the same people who will, you know, help you move, and then 12 of your friends who didn't help you move have all heard about it within like 3 hours. You know, like that's not what we're getting at here. We're getting at you do your job because it's your job. You do the task because it's a task that needs to be done. Not seeking out to be great by being, you know, this nice guy undercurrent. You know, so that you can be the human relations story on the news of how great of a humanitarian you are. You're still serving yourself. You're still lording it over people. I've got an old teacher friend who is, I use friend kind of loosely here, who this is what he does. You know, like he goes out and helps people, and then he tells you about how he helps people. And he's expecting this. Yay, you're such a great example. Whereas there are those other people that when you finally figure out that they've helped people, it's like 10 years down the road and you're like, oh, I always wondered how you got out of that hole. I didn't know they came to your aid. That's more so what Jesus is getting at here. Giving up yourself for the kingdom's sake. But then in case servant wasn't enough to kind of ding you between the eyes, if you've just asked Jesus for the place of being the number 2 men in the kingdom. It's not this way among you. Whoever wishes to be great must become your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. When Jesus says slave, what he means is your slave. Okay? Really hard. Sometimes my job is hard. We do a disservice, by the way, when we talk about slaves and employees as though that's the same concept. Very, very far from the difference. If I am in a job as an employee and I don't like my boss, or I think my company is full of just, moronicness, I can write a 2-week notice or write a 1-day notice, depending, however that works for you and your company, and I can walk out the door, never to come back. And that's totally my choice. As a slave, can't do that. As an employee, I can tell my boss, I'm not really comfortable doing that. I think chopping down a tree with a pocket knife is a bad idea, sir. And my boss will then evaluate, and there are certain policies that are in place for me to be able to say there's an unsafeness about that. Though I'd probably try it. I'm just saying, for the illustration, let's say I'm smarter than I really am. Whereas, talking about being smarter than I really am. Whereas what Jesus is getting at with slave is I don't have that choice. If God the Father says, you go here, that's where I'm going. Amen. I don't get to have the debate of, well, that place doesn't really seem safe, God. I don't know that that's, let's reevaluate my position with this company. I'm a slave. I serve. That's what I am. That's what I do. I'm defined by my position. That's what Jesus is getting at. If you really want to be great in the kingdom, you're going to have to become the least great person possible. Which is more about, because we often go, well, okay, I want to be great, so I'll be the slave. Okay, at that point, we've missed the axiom. We've missed the entirety of what Jesus is driving at. What Jesus is driving at is it's not about you. It's not about you figuring out how to be the absolute highest possible rank that you can be. What this is about is you serving the kingdom. What this is about is you guys, and consequently us guys, becoming the slave so that the kingdom advances, not us. So that God's will gets forwarded, not us. So that way, the kingdom becomes important. And then, just so we don't miss the point, this is how he phrases, this is what I want that to look like. In case that we were tempted to go the route of servitude so that we'll look great. Just as the Son of Man, which again is a term for Messiah, the anointed one, the one who's going to deliver, the one that everybody is expecting and everybody is just waiting for. That guy, Jesus, the Son of Man, the Messiah, did not come to be served. This was what they thought. They had the thought of the Messiah is coming and he'll deliver us, sure, and then he's going to live a life of luxury as kind of a new David. Which is true. Jesus does come, he does deliver them, and he is a new David. But he's the correct David. But it's not cushy tower David. It's servant David. It's the everlasting one. And that's what he's getting at here. But to serve. So, does God have the right to be served? Absolutely, he's God. He is the one who created the universe. The one who was before there was time. I mean, he's the everlasting one. The one that we say, behold, the Lord your God is one. It's a categorical statement. There's no one else that fits that category, but that even comes close to it. And that God, recognizing the need for justice and the need for mercy, goes to Jerusalem to die on the cross. That's what being the servant looks like. Walking away from all of the entitlement, walking away from all of the privilege, and saying, what I'm interested in is rectifying people back to God. That's what being the servant looks like. Whatever I have to give up so that the kingdom gets put into the lives of men and women, that's what I need to be doing. That's what being great in the kingdom is going to ultimately look like. And there's an irony about that, because on one hand we go, what? But then we look at guys like Paul. Think about all that he gives up. A cushy spot. He's rich. I'm inferring a little bit. But, he has enough sway where he could walk in and be like, you should give me a warrant to go kill people. And then just like, okay, here you go. He's got influence. He's got standing. He's got privilege. And he gives that up so that he can go get beat a bunch of times. So that he can get shipwrecked a bunch of times. So that he can get ran out of town a bunch of times. So that he can get mocked his entirety. So that he can get rocks thrown in his head a lot. That's what he gives up. That's what being great in the kingdom looks like. Jim Elliott, Nate Saint. We could just go down the list. Stephen, for instance. The list is long of people who have exemplified, as I learn to talk, exemplified what giving up our rights for the sake of the kingdom to advance looks like. But none more so, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Here's the word ransom as we bring this to a close, because it's really a beautiful emphasis, and it's something that I don't want us to forget. Ransom is not just simply a price that is paid, though it is. We shouldn't talk about ransom as though it's, I walk into Walmart and I see a loaf of bread and I'm going to pay whatever the cost is, and see, I've just bought that. I paid a ransom for it. On one hand, loosely, sort of. But a ransom is what you pay for somebody who is in slavery to be brought out of slavery and put into a position of not slavery. Jesus did not just simply pay a price for you. He bought you from slavery. What were we enslaved to? Sin and death. The book of Romans is very clear. Paul spells it out very, very well. You didn't sin and then become a sinner. You sin because you're a sinner. That's who you are. There is a default in us now because of that whole fall of the garden incident, that we're bent towards depravity. We're bent towards doing the things that are wrong. And Jesus says, I now am going to go pay a price. I, God himself, am ransoming. I am buying you out of slavery. I'm going to pay the price, which is a blood death. And I am a perfect lamb. And I'm going to go, and now you're free. But when we are bought out, that's a heavy toll. Think about how much you think you're worth, but it's God himself who died for you. What you thought you were worth before doesn't touch that cost. But at the same time, that's not something that we get to go, that's who I am. Because what this is about, it's following on the heels of, it's by grace. He just went and said, you schmo, who isn't working, go work. And they went, oh, okay. And they went out in the vineyard and they worked. And as a result of being obedient to the call, they get the wage. They get the wage of eternal life. This is the same for us. We are that schmo. We should probably identify more with the people on the back end of that than the front end, who are getting by grace the measure. And that's how Jesus explains that parable. And that's how Jesus explains it to us as well. He looks at us and says, you know what? You're right, they didn't work very hard. But this is all mine to give away anyways. And this is how I want to give it away. This is the example that we're supposed to follow. Where we don't decide, do you deserve the kingdom? Because it's not deserved. It never has been. It wasn't deserved when you got it. So it's not your job to, well, I need to make sure that the kingdom only gets to those who deserve it. Because at that point, just go home. Because neither you nor they are ever going to deserve it. But Jesus, as the great example, gives up his life so that we can have a relationship with the Father, so that we can be bought out of slavery. But there's also an expectation that we're going to live correctly as a result of that. You were bought so that you didn't have to give in to depravity. Do I think we can be perfect? No, but I think we can be a lot better than we are. And I think if we will adjust our attitude to no longer be okay with being sinners. Because I don't know how many times I hear the phrase from people, well, we're just human. No, you're a human who's gotten the Spirit of God living inside of them, who has been bought with a price. You are much more than a human. You are a saint. The word saint means one who is being sanctified in general terms. That's why the Bible talks about you as a saint. Throw that in front of your name the next time you sign your check. But it'd be a great conversation starter. I've never thought about trying that. That was one of those things that just popped into my head, and I often filter, but I didn't today. But see where that gets you in conversation. The point is that I give up myself for the kingdom, because the king of this kingdom created the kingdom by giving up himself for it. That's the message that we're supposed to take out. That's the life that we're supposed to be living. Are we? You're the best answer to that question. That's why a world who looks at us lining our own pockets, talking about ourselves in grandeur and splendor, gets confused. We need to make it so that they can't get confused about that. Let's pray.